Ethan walked down the quiet path leading to his small outpost home. The air of the alien moon was thin and cold, brushing against his skin like icy fingers. The twin moons above hung low, one blue and one silver, casting pale light over the silent plains. His boots crunched on the dry soil as dust swirled behind him. It had been 3 long months away on a mining job deep beneath the surface, and all he wanted now was warmth, food, and rest. The metal house stood alone against the horizon, its lights off, just as he left it. Everything looked normal, too normal. His breath formed small clouds in the air as he walked up to the front door. He punched in the access code, expecting the familiar click of unlocking bolts, but the door was already unlocked. He froze. That was wrong. Ethan never left it open, not on this planet. He hesitated, listening. The wind howled softly outside, but from inside he heard something. Faint, like whispers. His heartbeat quickened. He drew the small plasma torch from his belt. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it could burn through metal if needed. The whispers came again, light, nervous voices. Then a sound of something breaking, a cup or a plate shattering. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He slowly pushed the door open. The hinges creaked, echoing through the narrow hallway. The air inside was warm, filled with the faint scent of cooked food, which made no sense. He had left no power running. He took one cautious step inside, scanning the shadows. The small home was just as he remembered. Simple furniture, scattered tools, and a dim light above the kitchen table. Except now that light was on. Ethan moved silently, his boots making no sound on the metal floor. The plasma torch buzzed quietly in his hand. As he approached the kitchen, he saw movement. A small figure darted behind the counter. Another sound, a quick breath like a gasp. He stopped, standing still in the doorway. "Who's there?" He called out firmly, his voice echoing off the walls. No reply. Only the sound of nervous breathing. He stepped forward, ready for trouble. But when he turned the corner and pointed the light toward the counter, his hand froze mid-air. 2 small figures crouched there, eyes wide in fear. They were children, but not human. Their skin was pale blue, with faint glowing lines across their arms, pulsing softly like veins of light. Their hair shimmered silver under the kitchen light, and their large eyes, deep, bright, and scared, looked almost like liquid glass. One of them, slightly taller, held a broken mug in her trembling hands. The other hid behind her, clutching her arm tightly. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the sound of the wind outside filled the silence. Ethan slowly lowered the plasma torch. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The older one swallowed hard, her voice shaking as she spoke in broken Galactic common. "Please, don't send us away." Ethan blinked in confusion. "Send you away? What are you doing in my house?" The smaller one whispered something in her own alien language. The older one turned back to Ethan and said quietly, "Our mom, she's gone." Those words hit him like a cold knife. He looked around the kitchen again. There were crumbs on the table, a pot with half-burned food on the heater, and 2 tiny bowls. Someone had been trying to feed them. His heart twisted. "Where is she?" he asked gently. The older girl shook her head, tears forming in her glowing eyes. "She went outside 3 nights ago. Said to hide when the bad ships come." Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Raiders. He'd heard rumors. Pirates who captured alien settlers to sell or test. He crouched down to their level. "How long have you been alone?" The smaller one's voice was barely a whisper. "Since the sky burned." He didn't know what that meant, but fear filled their faces. They were just children, maybe 6 or 7 years old. His hand trembled slightly as he set the torch aside. "You haven't eaten, have you?" The taller one hesitated, then shook her head. Ethan stood, moving to the cupboard. He found an old ration pack and poured some warm broth into 2 cups. He handed them over slowly, trying not to scare them. The girls took them with both hands, sipping quickly, tears running down their small faces. He leaned back against the counter, watching. He'd lived through battles, mining collapses, and storms that could tear metal apart. But this was different. These 2 frightened children, alone on a dangerous world, sitting in his kitchen. It didn't make sense. When they finished, the older one looked up again. "You are human," she said carefully. Ethan nodded. "Yes, my name's Ethan. What's yours?" "Lyra," she said softly. "And this is Mina." Ethan gave a small nod. "Lyra, Mina. You can stay here tonight, okay? It's safe now. Lyra looked uncertain but nodded slowly. Outside, the wind grew stronger, rattling the windows. The silver moonlight flickered through the glass, throwing long shadows across the floor. Ethan turned off the kitchen light, but for a moment he thought he saw movement beyond the window. A quick flash of red. A small drone light, watching. He stepped closer to the glass, heart pounding again. But when he looked out, the darkness swallowed everything. Nothing moved. Only the whispering wind remained. He turned back toward the girls. Lyra and Mina were already curled up together on the couch, their glowing eyes half closed. Ethan stood silently for a while, staring at them. He didn't know who their mother was or what had happened here, but deep down one thought wouldn't leave his mind. If their mother was still out there. She was in danger, and whatever took her might be coming back. The morning light crept slowly through the thin curtains of Ethan's small house. It painted soft blue lines across the floor, lighting up the quiet room. The two alien girls, Lyra and Mina, were still sleeping on the couch, curled up under an old blanket. Their faintly glowing skin shimmered gently like moonlight trapped in water. Ethan stood at the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. The twin suns were rising, washing the alien world in shades of pink and gold. It should have been a peaceful sight, but peace was the one thing he didn't feel. He hadn't slept. Every sound outside had kept him awake. The rustle of wind, the creak of metal, the faraway hum of engines that might not have been wind at all. He kept seeing that faint red light from the night before, flickering through the window like an eye watching him. Now, as he stared into the distance, he thought he saw movement near the tree line, something dark shifting against the pale sand. He blinked, but it was gone. Behind him, a soft voice broke the silence. "You didn't sleep?" He turned. Lyra was awake, sitting up, her silver hair messy and her eyes still heavy. She looked fragile, but there was a quiet strength in her voice. Ethan shook his head, didn't want to. Mina stirred beside her sister, rubbing her eyes. "It's morning?" she asked softly, her voice weak but curious. "Yeah," Ethan said, forcing a small smile. "Morning." He moved to the food shelf and pulled out another ration pack. "You two hungry?" Mina nodded quickly, her stomach growling in answer. Ethan poured warm liquid into small metal cups again. The smell filled the air, something like oatmeal mixed with old coffee. But the girls didn't care. They drank fast, their small hands trembling from hunger. While they ate, Ethan crouched beside them. "Lyra," he began slowly, "you said your mom went out 3 nights ago?" She nodded, her expression clouding. "Yes, she said she would come back. She never did." "Did she say where she was going?" Lyra hesitated. "She said she would find help. She told us to hide in a warm place. We found your house. We were scared." Ethan sighed quietly. His house sat on the edge of a mining zone, 5 kilometers from the nearest settlement. If their mother had gone looking for help, she might have headed toward the cliffs to the west, or worse, toward the canyon routes where raiders were often seen. "Do you know what kind of ships took your people?" he asked. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "They were black, like shadows. They came with fire. They took everyone from the village. Only we and Mother ran away." Ethan clenched his fists. He remembered hearing about those attacks before. Raiders who hunted weak colonies, selling survivors or testing alien DNA for illegal research. He looked at the 2 frightened girls again. They were lucky to be alive. Mina tugged his sleeve gently. "Will they come here too?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. Ethan met her eyes. "Not if I can help it." He stood up and checked his equipment. His comms device blinked, still offline. The signal towers must have been damaged in the last storm. That meant no calls for help, no backup. He was alone. He turned back to the girls. "You two stay here, understand? Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone unless it's me." Lyra frowned. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to look for your mother," Ethan said simply. Lyra's glowing eyes widened in surprise. "You don't have to. You're not from our clan. You could be hurt." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe. But no one should be left out there alone." She stared at him for a moment, silent, then nodded slowly. "Be careful, human." He packed quickly, energy cells, a small med kit, and his plasma torch. Before stepping outside, he turned to look at them one more time. Mina was clutching the edge of the blanket, watching him with fear in her small, bright eyes. "You promise you'll come back?" she asked. Ethan's throat tightened. I'll do my best. He stepped outside. The wind hit his face, carrying the smell of dust and metal. The ground shimmered in the morning heat as he started toward the distant forest. The house behind him grew smaller and smaller until it was just a speck. The landscape stretched endlessly, rolling hills of silver rock scattered with twisted alien trees whose leaves glowed faintly under the twin suns. It was beautiful but deadly. Every step he took made him feel like something unseen was watching him. After a while, he noticed faint footprints on the ground, small, light ones. The tracks of someone who wasn't human. He followed them deeper into the forest through mist and shadow. He stopped when he saw something half buried under a tree. A small piece of torn fabric, purple with symbols stitched in gold. It looked like part of a cloak. Alien blood darkened the edges. His stomach twisted. Then he heard it, a soft hum from somewhere ahead. He crouched, scanning the trees. There, between the thick roots, a faint red light blinked once, then vanished. A drone. Ethan's heart pounded. He turned toward his comms again, but it was still dead. He ducked behind a rock, watching the shadows. If raiders were still nearby, the girls weren't safe. He stood, his jaw tightening. He had to get back to them, fast. The forest whispered with strange sounds as he ran, the alien wind swirling around him. He didn't look back, but he could feel eyes on him. Something was already moving toward the house, and he knew he might be too late. Ethan ran through the uneven ground, his boots crunching on alien roots and glowing moss. The forest was darker now, the twin suns hidden behind thick clouds. Strange bird-like creatures shrieked from the treetops as he passed. His breathing grew heavy, but he didn't stop. Every step echoed with one thought: the girls are alone. He had followed the trail of the alien mother until the marks simply vanished. No footprints, no blood, no signs of life. Only broken branches and scorch marks that told a story of struggle. He had seen enough of these scenes during human rescue missions to know what they meant. Someone had been taken. The air around him buzzed faintly. His communicator blinked to life for a second, crackling with static. Movement detected near, then it went dead. Ethan froze. His stomach dropped. The only movement detector he owned was the one in his security system, back home. He turned sharply and started running back the way he came. Branches snapped against his arms. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting in every direction. Faint blue spores floated in the air, making the scene look like a dream, but this was no dream. His pulse pounded as he finally reached the edge of the forest. His house stood in the distance, small and fragile beneath the sky. But something was wrong. The air shimmered above the roof. Ethan zoomed in through his visor lens. 3 small hovering shapes circled the building, raider drones. Each was shaped like a metal spider with spinning blades and red eyes glowing bright. Their scanners pulsed as they searched through the windows. Ethan's hand gripped his plasma torch tighter. "No," he whispered. "Not now." He sprinted downhill, sliding on loose sand. As he got closer, he could see faint flashes of light from inside the house. Movement. Lyra and Mina must have seen them. The first drone lowered itself near the door, its metal claws sparking as it began to cut through the lock. Another floated toward the roof, scanning for heat signatures. Ethan's mind raced. He had no heavy weapon, no comms, and no backup. But he wasn't going to let 2 children die in his kitchen. He dropped low and moved along the shadows, circling behind the house. His training kicked in, quiet steps, slow breathing, no wasted motion. He pulled out his tool belt, searching for anything useful. One small EMP grenade sat in the pouch, old, half-broken, but maybe it would still work. Ethan pressed the switch, counted to 3, then threw it toward the nearest drone. A flash of blue light exploded across the air. The first drone froze mid-flight, its red eyes flickering before it crashed into the ground, sparks flying. The others turned instantly, scanning for the source. "Target detected," one of them hissed in a robotic voice. "Yeah, come find me," Ethan muttered under his breath. He jumped from behind the rock, firing his plasma torch. The blue beam struck the second drone, melting half its armor. The drone screeched, spinning wildly, firing a burst of red plasma back at him. Ethan dove into the dirt, the blast missing his shoulder by inches. The third drone shot downward, slicing through the roof. Inside, he heard Mina's terrified scream. "Stay down!" He shouted, firing again. The beam hit the drone's propeller, sending it crashing into the sand. But the second one recovered fast, locking its scanner on him. Unauthorized life form. "Human signature detected," it said, raising its blaster. Before it could fire, Ethan swung the plasma torch full power, The heat burned through its weapon arm, cutting it off completely. The drone sparked, screamed in mechanical rage, and exploded in a burst of smoke and metal shards. The air went still. The smell of burned circuits filled the night. Ethan coughed, his arm trembling from the recoil. His right sleeve was scorched, blood seeping from a small burn, but he didn't stop. He ran to the house, slamming through the broken door. Inside, the walls were cracked, furniture overturned. Lyra was hugging Mina tightly behind the kitchen table. Their glowing eyes widened when they saw him.
"Ethan,"
Lyra cried.
"the flying things, they tried to take us."
He crouched down quickly, scanning the room. "It's okay, they're gone. You're safe now." Mina clung to his arm, her small hands shaking. "You came back," she whispered. "Of course I did," Ethan said softly, though his heart was still racing. He checked the outside again through the window. Smoke rose from the destroyed drones, drifting into the darkening sky. The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. He turned back to Lyra. "Did you see where they came from?" She shook her head. "No, they just appeared. They said something in the machine voice. They were looking for biological targets." Ethan frowned. That meant the raiders were scanning for survivors. And if they sent drones this deep into the wild, the main group couldn't be far behind. He closed the blinds and locked the door, though he knew a lock wouldn't stop what was coming. "You two need to stay close to me from now on," he said firmly. "No more wandering, no more lights, no noise. Understand?" Lyra nodded quickly, holding Mina tighter. Ethan sat beside them, exhaustion finally catching up with him. His mind spun with questions. Who are these raiders hunting? Why target alien families this far from civilization? And most of all, why did these girls end up in his home? Outside, thunder rumbled far away. The horizon flickered with red flashes like silent explosions. Ethan's eyes hardened as he watched. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. If their mother was still alive, she was running out of time. And if the raiders came back tonight, they'd find a human waiting for them. Night had fallen again, darker than before. The wind howled through the cracks in the metal walls, carrying dust that shimmered faintly under the twin moons. Inside the damaged house, Ethan worked fast, repairing what he could. Sparks flew from his plasma cutter as he patched a hole in the wall left by one of the drones. Every sound outside made him pause, listening for trouble. Lyra sat beside her younger sister, Mina, on the couch, wrapping her small arms around her. The two alien girls watched him quietly, their glowing eyes reflecting the flickering light from his tools. They looked tired, frightened, but safer than before. Ethan glanced at them between welds. "You two doing okay?" Lyra nodded slowly. "You fought them," she said softly. "You protected us." Ethan gave a faint, weary smile. "I told you I would." He didn't tell them how close it had been. His right arm was burned, his shoulder ached, and he had only one power cell left for his torch. But none of that mattered. What mattered were those two children, alive, breathing, safe for now. As he checked the generator, a loud click came from the motion sensor above the door. Ethan froze. He turned slowly toward the display screen. It showed movement outside again. Multiple signals, his heart sank. "Not again," he whispered. He rushed to the window, lifting the edge of the curtain just enough to peek through. 3 figures were moving toward the house, tall, armored shapes glowing red in the dark. "Raiders. Down," he hissed to the girls. "Hide behind the table now!" Lyra grabbed Mina and pulled her under the metal kitchen table. Ethan switched off the lights and crouched by the wall, gripping his plasma torch tightly. His heart hammered against his ribs. Outside, the heavy steps grew closer. A faint electronic voice broke through the wind. Thermal readings confirmed. 1 adult human, 2 alien juveniles, capture protocol engaged. Ethan's blood turned cold. They weren't just raiders, they were hunters. The first shadow moved near the door. A laser cutter began melting through the metal lock. The door glowed bright orange. Ethan backed away, thinking fast. He spotted an old mining barrel near the wall, half full of fuel gel. That could work, he waited. The lock snapped and the door crashed open. 3 armored raiders stepped in, their glowing red visors sweeping across the room. One raised his blaster rifle. "Target acquired." Ethan kicked the fuel barrel hard toward them and fired his torch. The torch beam struck the gel, igniting it instantly. A burst of blue flame filled the entryway, washing the intruders in a wave of fire. The blast knocked them backward. The nearest raider screamed, armor melting as he fell. Ethan rolled behind the counter, coughing through the smoke. Blaster shots tore through the walls, scorching everything they hit. Mina whimpered softly under the table.
Ethan yelled, "Stay down! Don't move!"
He peeked around the counter and fired again, melting one raider's weapon arm clean off. The other shouted orders in a harsh alien tongue, then hurled a small metal sphere. It rolled across the floor, blinking red. A grenade. Ethan grabbed a steel tray and slammed it over the grenade just as it exploded. The blast still sent him flying across the room, pain shooting through his arm. Dust filled the air. The lights flickered, and everything went silent for a second except for the ringing in his ears. Through the haze, he saw one raider limping toward the girls. Lyra stood suddenly, shielding Mina with her small body. "Stay away," she cried. The raider raised his weapon, but Ethan was already moving. He tackled the creature from behind, slamming it into the wall. They struggled, metal grinding against metal. The raider's clawed hand reached for his throat, but Ethan shoved the plasma torch up under its armor and triggered it. The hiss of burning metal filled the room. The raider screamed and collapsed. Ethan staggered back, coughing, his face streaked with ash and sweat. Only one enemy remained, backing away toward the open door. "Retreat," the mechanical voice said. "Human, danger level high." Ethan aimed one last time and fired. The torch beam cut through the night, striking the raider's chest. The creature fell, its red visor dimming to black. The silence that followed was heavy. The smell of burnt metal and smoke filled the room. Ethan's hands trembled as he lowered the torch. His right sleeve was torn, his arm bleeding where shrapnel had hit. But he didn't care. He turned toward the table. "You can come out now." Lyra crawled out first, her silver hair singed at the tips, her eyes wide with shock. Mina followed, clinging to her hand. They ran to Ethan, hugging him tightly. "You saved us again," Mina whispered. Ethan knelt down, his breath still unsteady. "I'll always save you," he said quietly. "That's a promise." Lyra looked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with tears. "You're like her," she said. "Our mom. She said humans were dangerous, but you protect." Ethan didn't know what to say. He only put his hand on her shoulder gently. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The wind outside had quieted, and the twin moons shone through the broken window, their light soft and silver. Ethan finally stood, looking at the damage. The house was nearly destroyed, smoke curling from the walls. He needed to fix the power, treat his wounds, and plan what to do next. But one thought echoed in his mind. This attack wasn't random. The raiders had come for the children. Someone wanted them alive, and that meant their mother might still be out there. Alive, captured, waiting. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked down at the two small girls beside him and whispered, "I'm going to bring her back." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying faint mechanical echoes from far away. The war for their survival had just begun. The night dragged on in uneasy silence. Smoke still curled from the burned-out walls, and the air inside the house was heavy with the smell of scorched metal. Ethan sat by the window, his bandaged arm resting on the table, eyes locked on the horizon. The two moons had begun to fade behind clouds, their light swallowed by the deep blue of dawn. Behind him, the alien girls slept side by side on the couch, their small forms glowing faintly in the half-light. Mina's tiny hand gripped her sister's sleeve, even in sleep. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about their words from earlier. "You're like her." Their mother had fought too, maybe just like this, trying to protect them until the end. He rubbed his tired eyes. He was no hero, just an engineer who'd seen too much war in his time. But looking at those two fragile children, he felt something stir inside him, a duty that went beyond logic or safety. He stood, scanning the kitchen one more time for supplies. The house was a mess of debris and broken panels. While clearing the counter, his hand brushed against something small wedged between the power cells, a tiny metallic locket, smooth and glowing faintly blue. Ethan frowned. He hadn't seen it before. Carefully, he picked it up and turned it over. Strange alien symbols were etched along the sides, symbols that matched the ones on Lyra's pendant. He pressed a small indentation at the center, and the locket hummed softly, projecting a flickering blue light into the air. A holographic image appeared, blurred at first, then clear. It was their mother. Her skin was the same pale hue as the girls, though her face was marked with bruises and dirt. Her voice was faint, broken, but clear enough. "If you find this, please, help them. They took me to the canyon base, the raiders' outpost near the old mines. They want our kind for something. My daughters must live. Tell them I love them. The hologram flickered again and went dark. Ethan stood frozen. The canyon base. He knew that place. It was a mining complex that had gone silent years ago after a reactor collapse. Raiders had likely turned it into their stronghold. It was more than 20 kilometers away across rough terrain and radiation zones. He closed his fist around the locket. That was where she was. A soft sound came from behind him. "Ethan?" Lyra was awake, sitting up, her glowing eyes wide with fear and hope. "What is that?" He hesitated, then held out the locket. "Your mother left this message. She's alive. She's being held in the canyon base." Lyra gasped softly, covering her mouth. Mina stirred beside her, half awake. "Mama," she whispered weakly. Ethan crouched beside them, his tone calm but firm. "Listen to me. I can go after her. But you two have to stay here. It's dangerous out there." Lyra shook her head quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, you'll die if you go alone. The raiders are strong. They have ships and machines." Ethan gave a faint smile. "I've faced worse." She looked at him for a long moment, trembling. Why would you help us? You're not one of us." Ethan looked toward the window where the faint morning light was beginning to glow. "Because no one else will. And because no child deserves to grow up wondering if their mother is still alive." Mina crawled to him, her small hands clutching his burned arm. "Will you bring her back?" He nodded slowly. "I'll try my best." The younger girl looked at him, her lip trembling. "Please, promise." "I promise," Ethan said softly, his voice steady. He stood and began preparing for the journey. He scavenged through the broken crates, took a water pack, a few rations, spare energy cells, and the half-functional rifle he'd been repairing for months. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he strapped on his gear, Lyra came up beside him. "If you die," she whispered, "and then we die too." He turned to her, meeting her glowing eyes. "Then I better not die." She didn't smile, but her expression softened. She reached out and placed her small hand over his chest. "The light inside you," she said quietly. "It's strong, like my mother's." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He only gave a small nod. When he finally stepped outside, the first rays of dawn painted the landscape gold. The alien forest shimmered like glass, every leaf dripping with dew. The horizon stretched endlessly, and somewhere beyond it the canyon waited. He glanced back one last time. Lyra and Mina stood in the doorway watching him. Lyra held her sister close, their silver hair glowing in the morning sun. "Keep the door locked," Ethan called. "Don't open it for anyone but me." Lyra nodded. "We'll wait." Ethan adjusted his pack and started walking. Each step echoed softly on the metallic ground, fading into the wind. He didn't know if he'd survive what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just fighting to save a stranger anymore. He was fighting for family, and as the sun rose over the alien hills, his shadow stretched long behind him, following him toward danger, hope, and the promise he had made to two lost children. The twin suns were just rising when Ethan reached the edge of the canyon. The wind was sharp here, cutting across the cliffs like a knife. Below him stretched a maze of stone and steel, the old mining base now rebuilt into a raider fortress. Metal towers jutted from the ground like broken bones, surrounded by black smoke that twisted into the dawn. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, adjusting his visor. The readings were clear, on heat signatures everywhere. Patrols moved in tight formations. Drones hummed overhead, sweeping searchlights across the dusty ground. It wasn't just a hideout anymore. It was a war zone, he whispered to himself. All this, for two kids and their mother? No, he realized. It wasn't about them, not just them. These raiders were hunting whole alien clans, capturing them for something darker. Maybe experiments, maybe trade. Either way, it made his blood boil. He checked his gear one last time. One half-dead rifle, 2 grenades, a plasma torch, and the locket with the mother's hologram tucked into his chest pocket. Not much, but enough for one man who didn't plan on running. The canyon echoed with metallic sounds, drilling, engines, and shouting voices in a harsh alien tongue. Ethan moved quietly down the slope, sliding from rock to rock, keeping low to the shadows. Every few seconds, a drone passed overhead, its red scanner slicing through the mist. He waited for one to move past, then sprinted across open ground, diving behind a pile of metal crates. From there, he could see the main compound, a huge gate reinforced with energy shields. Guards stood beside it, their weapons gleaming under the red light. Too many, he muttered. Can't go through the front. His eyes scanned the wall. A smaller tunnel entrance near the base caught his attention. It looked half-collapsed and maybe forgotten. He crawled toward it, using the dust and shadows as cover. When he reached the opening, he found an old maintenance hatch rusted shut. "Let's see if you still open," he whispered. He pressed his plasma torch against the latch. It hissed, glowing bright orange before snapping free. He slipped inside. The tunnel was dark, narrow, and filled with the stench of old oil. Strange symbols were painted on the walls, marks of the Raider clans. He moved carefully, his flashlight flickering. After several turns, he reached a larger chamber lit by green lamps. There were cells, dozens of them, and inside, alien prisoners, weak and pale, huddled together. Their eyes widened when they saw him. One reached out, whispering in a broken voice, "Human?" Ethan held up a finger for silence. "I'm looking for someone," he whispered back. "Female, silver hair, tall. She has 2 daughters." The prisoner nodded weakly. "They took her to the core. Experiments." He pointed toward a door at the far end of the chamber. "You can't go." "Too many?" Ethan gave a grim smile. "That's never stopped me before." He moved quietly toward the door. 2 guards stood there talking. Ethan picked up a metal shard from the ground and tossed it across the room. The sound made them turn. Before they could react, he was already moving. He grabbed one guard from behind, slamming him into the wall, then fired a silent shot into the other's chest. Both dropped instantly. He slipped through the door. The corridor beyond glowed with eerie blue light. Strange machinery lined the walls, cages filled with energy, humming with power. In the center, strapped to a table, was Tisha, the girl's mother. She was weak, her skin pale and bruised, but her eyes were still fierce. When she saw him, confusion crossed her face. "You human?" Ethan rushed forward, cutting her restraints with the plasma torch. "Your daughter sent me," he said quickly. "We need to go now." Her eyes softened. "They're alive? They're waiting for you." But before she could answer, a loud alarm blared through the compound. Red lights flashed. The intercom voice roared, "Intruder detected! Human signature identified! Lockdown initiated!" "Damn it!" Ethan hissed. He helped Tisha to her feet. She staggered but managed to stand. Together they ran down the corridor, the floor shaking beneath them as explosions erupted above. Drones poured into the tunnels, firing red beams that sizzled past them. Ethan ducked and fired back, blasting 2 out of the air. Sparks showered across the walls. "Keep moving," he shouted. They burst into the main exit hall. Outside, the suns had fully risen, painting the canyon gold. Raider ships hovered overhead, preparing to fire. Ethan grabbed one of his last grenades, pulled the pin, and threw it toward the power core. The explosion ripped through the base. Energy arced like lightning, tearing metal apart. The ground trembled, walls collapsing as alarms screamed louder. Ethan grabbed Tisha's arm and dragged her toward the outer cliffs. They climbed over broken metal and rubble, the wind carrying the sound of chaos behind them. When they finally reached the top, both collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The fortress below burned in a sea of fire and smoke. Tisha turned to him weakly. "You risked everything. For strangers." Ethan looked back at the flames, then at her. "No one deserves to be left behind." She gave a faint smile, tears glistening in her eyes. "My daughters, I thought I'd never see them again." "You will," Ethan said firmly. "Let's go home." As the sun rose higher, the 2 figures disappeared into the glowing mist of the desert. Behind them, the Raider fortress collapsed into ruins, and the smoke of war faded into the light of a new day. The mission was over, but the story of the human and the alien family, that had just begun. The suns were climbing high when Ethan and Tisha finally reached the ridge overlooking the valley. The air shimmered with heat, and their shadows stretched long across the rocks. Behind them, a black pillar of smoke still rose from the canyon, the last sign of the Raiders' fortress. Ethan's lungs burned. Every muscle ached, but he didn't stop. Tisha walked beside him, limping slightly, leaning on a metal rod he had fashioned into a crutch. She was weak but alive, and for now that was enough. They followed the path through the silent plains until the familiar outline of his small house came into view, half destroyed, scorched, but still standing. For a moment, Ethan almost laughed. "Home, sweet home," he muttered, but the laughter faded when he saw two small figures at the doorway. Lyra and Mina. The girls stood frozen for a heartbeat, as if afraid to believe what they were seeing. Then, with a cry, Lyra ran forward. "Mama!" Tisha dropped the crutch and fell to her knees as her daughters crashed into her arms. All three clung together, crying and laughing at once. The sound echoed softly across the barren field, pure, fragile joy in a world that had forgotten such things. Ethan stood a few steps away, watching quietly. His chest felt heavy, but in a good way. He'd seen too much loss in his life, too many endings. But this was what he'd fought for. Tisha looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and dust. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He gave a small smile. "I told them I'd bring you back." Lyra turned toward him, her eyes shining. "You did." "You really did." Mina nodded beside her, gripping his hand with her tiny fingers. "We knew you would," she said softly. Ethan knelt beside them, his voice low. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe. Inside, the house smelled of ash and burned metal, but it was still shelter. Tisha moved slowly through it, touching the walls, the broken table, the couch where her daughters had slept. "You risked your life for us," she said. "For people you didn't even know." Ethan shrugged, sitting down heavily. "Didn't really have a choice." She tilted her head, studying him. "You always have a choice." He met her gaze, his tired eyes softening. "Not this time." Tisha smiled faintly and sat beside him. Lyra and Mina played nearby, giggling softly as they tried to clean the dust from his armor. The light from the suns poured in through the cracked window, painting them all in gold. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence was peaceful, a kind of peace Ethan hadn't felt in years. Finally, Tisha said quietly, "Our people will remember this, human. What you did will not be forgotten." He shook his head. "I didn't do it for memory." She looked at him curiously. "Then why?" He glanced at the two little girls, their silver hair glowing in the sunlight. "Because they deserved a chance." "That's all?" Tisha followed his gaze, then nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "A warrior from my clan long ago. He believed that strength was meant to protect, not destroy. You have that same fire." Ethan gave a quiet chuckle. "If you call nearly dying fire, then yeah, maybe." That made her smile. As the suns began to set, painting the sky orange and violet, Ethan stepped outside. The air was cool now, filled with the scent of alien flowers carried by the wind. He could see the lights of distant ships, the rescue team from the colony arriving at last. One of the officers approached, saluting. "We picked up the distress beacon from the raider base," he said. "You did quite a number down there. You're lucky to be alive." Ethan just shrugged. "Guess luck finally decided to help out." The officer nodded toward the house. "You coming with us? We can take you back to the station. Safer there." Ethan looked at the small family inside, the mother holding her daughters close, their laughter mixing with the warm glow of home. He shook his head. "No, I think I'll stay." The officer hesitated. "You sure?" "Yeah," Ethan said, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "They need someone to fix the roof anyway." The officer smiled faintly and left him there. Ethan turned back toward the house. Lyra was waving at him from the window and Mina was trying to climb onto the table. Tisha was watching them both with a peaceful expression that said everything. He took a deep breath, feeling the quiet settle over him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a wanderer or a soldier or a survivor. He felt like he belonged. The twin suns dipped below the horizon, leaving trails of crimson light across the sky. Inside the small broken house on the alien plane, laughter filled the air, human and alien voices blending into something new. Ethan smiled softly to himself. In a universe filled with war and chaos, he had found something worth fighting for. A family,